The city was still half asleep when Daniel Pierce woke up. Dawn was a pale whisper against the skyline, a faint blur of gold between tall glass towers. His penthouse apartment, all marble and silence, sat high enough that he couldn't hear the streets below. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of a designer clock kept him company. He stood at the window, coffee in hand, staring at the world he owned but could no longer feel. Down below, the bakery on the corner would just be opening. He knew because he'd seen it once, years ago, when he still walked among ordinary people. He used to love the smell of bread and butter, the way steam fogged up the small windows. Now, he ordered pastries flown in from Paris. They arrived perfect, tasteless, and cold. There was a time Daniel believed money could make life simpler. He worked until his bones hummed with caffeine and exhaustion. And when he finally made it, when his company became one of the most valuable in the country, he thought peace would come. It didn't. It only got quieter. That morning, he dressed in his usual tailored suit and took the elevator down 43 floors. He didn't really have anywhere to go. The meetings were handled, the investments automated. But staying inside was worse. The walls were too clean, too empty. He walked aimlessly until he reached a narrow street he'd never noticed before. The buildings here were older, cracked with stories time had left behind. A flickering sign read, "Marlowe's Repairs, radios, watches, and things that still matter." He might have walked past, but there was something about the warm glow spilling through the dusty glass, a soft amber light that didn't belong to this part of the city. He pushed open the door. A small bell rang, the kind that sounded like memory. Inside, it smelled of rain-soaked wood and oil. Shelves lined the walls, filled with clocks, radios, and music boxes in various states of disrepair. At a workbench in the corner sat an old man, his back curved like a question mark, glasses perched on his nose. He looked up briefly, then went back to tinkering with a wristwatch. "Looking for something?" the man asked, without looking. "I'm not sure," Daniel replied. "Good," the man said. "Most people who come in knowing exactly what they want leave disappointed." Daniel smiled faintly and walked closer. "You fix all this yourself?" "Every piece," the man said, "though some things aren't meant to work again. I just keep them company." Daniel found that oddly comforting. He picked up a small brass clock from the shelf. It wasn't working, but it was beautiful. A little crooked, like it had a heartbeat of its own. The old man wiped his hands and looked at Daniel more closely now. "You've got tired eyes," he said softly. "Not from work, from thinking too much." Daniel chuckled, unsure why the word stung. "I run a company. Comes with the territory." "Ah," the man nodded. "And does it come with sleep?" Daniel didn't answer. The old man just smiled faintly and went back to his workbench. "I'm Marlowe," he said after a pause. "Sit if you like. Coffee's terrible, but it's warm." The next thing Daniel knew, he was sitting on an old wooden stool, holding a chipped mug. It was instant coffee, bitter and too hot. But somehow it felt more real than anything he'd had in months. Marlowe didn't talk much after that. He just worked, the steady click of his tools filling the silence. There was something peaceful about it, like the air itself had slowed down. When Daniel finally left, the city felt louder again. That night he couldn't sleep. The apartment's emptiness pressed in around him. He thought of the old shop, the smell of oil and dust, the rhythm of clock hands moving again after being still. He went back the next morning, and the morning after that. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started helping out around the shop. Not because he needed to, but because it gave his hands something to do. He swept the floor, cleaned the glass, and sometimes just sat quietly while Marlowe worked. One afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, Daniel asked, "Why do you fix things that people don't use anymore?" Marlowe didn't look up. "Because once, someone cared enough to build them. That means something." "But they're broken." "Everything breaks," Marlowe said simply. "Doesn't mean it's worthless." Daniel didn't respond. After a long silence, Marlowe continued, his voice soft and even. "I had a son once. brilliant boy. Thought the world was too small for him. He left to make something of himself. And he did. Big job, big money. But somewhere along the way, he stopped calling. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. 2 years later, Marlowe went on, I got a letter from his company. They wanted me to collect his belongings. Burnout, they called it. The word sounds clean. The truth never is. The rain grew heavier, blurring the street outside. Marlowe took off his glasses, rubbed the lenses, and whispered, he thought he needed to win. I just wanted him to live. The room fell quiet again, except for the ticking of half-repaired clocks, each one slightly out of sync. That night, Daniel walked home in the rain. The city lights shimmered in puddles, bending and warping. He passed a bus stop where a homeless man sat, sheltering under a thin blanket. The man smiled faintly as Daniel walked by. Something inside him broke. Daniel stopped, turned, and went back. Without overthinking, he handed the man his umbrella. The man looked surprised. You'll get soaked, he said. It's just water, Daniel replied. The man laughed softly. You're the first one today who stopped. Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. When he finally reached his apartment, he was drenched. He stood by the window again, watching the same street, only now it looked different. Alive, somehow. He kept visiting Marlowe, though neither of them talked about anything grand. They spoke of small things, the best way to fix a clock spring, the smell of rain, the people who passed by. One day, Daniel brought him a broken wristwatch. It was my father's, he said. Stopped years ago. Marlowe took it gently, turning it over in his palm. You want me to make it work again? Daniel hesitated. I think I just want it to breathe again. Marlowe smiled, understanding. That I can do. He placed the watch on the bench, hands moving slowly, carefully. Daniel watched the old man's fingers tremble slightly, the scars visible along his knuckles. You ever wish things had gone differently? Daniel asked quietly. Every day, Marlowe said. But wishing is just another way of standing still. So I fix what's in front of me. Weeks passed. Winter came, gentle and gray. One morning, Daniel found the shop closed. A handwritten note on the door. Gone for a while. Don't worry about the clocks. They'll keep time without me. No signature. Daniel waited days, then weeks. But Marlowe didn't return. He started opening the shop himself, just to keep it warm. He cleaned the windows, wound the clocks, made terrible coffee in the same chipped mug. It wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about keeping something alive. Months later, a small parcel arrived at Daniel's apartment. No return address, just his name, written in Marlowe's shaky handwriting. Inside was the old wristwatch, repaired, gleaming softly in the morning light. Attached was a note. Daniel, you were never broken. You were just waiting to be heard. M. Daniel sat there for a long time, the watch ticking faintly in his hand. It wasn't perfect. The rhythm was uneven, like a heartbeat learning its pace again. But it was alive. He put it on. Time passed differently after that. Daniel sold his company shares, quietly and without ceremony. He opened a small workshop, Pierce Repairs, in the same old street, right beside where Marlowe's shop used to be. The same golden light filled the windows now, the same smell of oil and coffee and rain. He fixed things, not for profit, but for peace. People brought their broken watches, radios, sometimes even old music boxes that hadn't sung in years. He listened to their stories. He learned their silences. And every night before locking up, he'd wind his father's watch, the one Marlowe had mended, and whisper a quiet thank you into the still air. One evening, a young woman came into the shop. She looked tired, eyes red from crying. She placed a cracked pocket watch on the counter. It was my brother's, she said. He passed away last month. It doesn't work anymore. Daniel nodded gently. We'll take care of it. As she turned to leave, she paused. You remind me of someone. she said softly. Daniel smiled. Maybe someone reminded me first. That night, he closed the shop and sat by the window. Outside, snow fell in slow, quiet waves. He held the repaired watch in his palm, listening to its uneven ticking. He thought of Marlowe, the way his hands moved, the way he spoke softly but left words that stayed. He thought of all the broken things that weren't really broken, just waiting for warmth to find them again. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel alone. He turned off the lights, the room bathed in the glow of one small lamp, its light trembling gently against the walls. The city outside kept moving, loud and restless, but inside, time stood still. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." In the morning, people would pass the shop without knowing the story behind it, without realizing that inside, a man who once owned everything was learning how to live again, one broken piece at a time. They would not know that each clock ticked a little unevenly because he preferred it that way, because perfection was too lonely. And somewhere, in that golden lamplight, the richest man who once envied the poor had finally found his wealth, not in what he owned, but in what he chose to keep alive.